All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kyle Kugler, and I am the Iowa SourceLink Program Coordinator at the University of Northern Iowa's John Papajohn Entrepreneurial Center. In today's webinar, Mike Mertens will be covering individual income tax updates. I believe that's correct. Iowa pass-through tax, entity tax. My apologies, I didn't change that from my last time talking. Mike is a policy director for pass-through entities at the Iowa Department of Revenue. So welcome, Mike, and thank you for sharing this information with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit about what we do at Iowa SourceLink and some information regarding today's webinar. At Iowa SourceLink, we assist Iowa entrepreneurs who are looking to start, grow, fund, and even exit their businesses by providing step-by-step guides, make helpful referrals, and connections to our nearly 400 city, county, and statewide organizations who provide free business assistance to those same entrepreneurs. We're also home to the Business License Information Center, which is a centralized database of all business licensing within the state of Iowa. So let's go over some housekeeping items first, and then we can get the show on the road. Just so you're aware, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on our YouTube channel in a couple of days, a few days. Our team will send you an email with the link where you can watch the recording when it is actually published. So just keep an eye out for that and it will be sent to you. The slides you see today will be shared momentarily in the chat box by my colleague, Sophie Troxel. So thank you, Sophie, for doing that. Sophie and I will be sharing other resources and contact information if and when they're brought up during the webinar today. So just keep checking the chat box and look for those resources and information from us. If you have any questions today, utilize the Q&A chat box. It's at the bottom half of your screen. We're going to hold off on answering the majority of the questions that come through until the very end. If we have some time during the middle of the presentation, some of those questions might be answered. We'll just kind of see where it goes from there. If there isn't enough time to go through all of the questions today, do not worry, as all questions will be sent to Mike alongside your contact information. And then lastly, as a disclaimer, Iowa SourceLink does not provide any continuing education, certification, or certificates for your attendance here today. We do, however, send out an email to all those who attend that can be used as proof of your attendance within a few days after the webinar concludes. Again, we do not provide continuing education certification for your attendance here today. An email will be sent out to you that you can use as proof of attendance. So with that, Mike, I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. All right. So thank you, everybody, for spending your lunch hour with the Iowa Department of Revenue. Today, we are going to talk about the Iowa pass-through entity tax. As Kyle mentioned, my name is Mike Mertens. I'm the policy director for pass-through entities here at the department. My contact information is on this first slide. So feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions about this or any other related tax item that you need assistance from the Iowa Department of Revenue. Before we dive into the topic presentation, we have our obligatory disclaimer slide. Just so you know, this presentation is intended for general educational purposes. Please don't construe anything in this presentation as legal advice. The department could take a contrary position in the future from one that is stated in this presentation. So this last May 10th, Governor Reynolds signed House File 352, which is a new Iowa pass-through entity tax. And that with that signing of that bill, Iowa joins about 30 other states, 30 plus at this point, that have enacted these pass-through entity taxes. All of them are slightly different. There are no boilerplate model acts that these states have enacted. So it's important to go through all of the features of the Iowa legislation to make sure that you understand how it'll work here in Iowa. So what I'd like to do today is go through, first give everybody a short introduction to the new pass-through entity tax, which we're calling the PTET or PTET. So if you hear me reference the PTET, that's what I'm talking about. I'd like to give everybody just kind of a 10,000 foot overview of how this new law will work. And then from there, I'd like to roll right into Some specifics for tax year 2022. I know that's on the forefront of everybody's mind. That will include a tutorial of how the new GovConnect Iowa form will work. If we have some time at that point, it might be good to take some questions. And then I'd like to roll into discussing how this will work prospectively for tax year 2023 or later. And then again, we'll take some questions at the end. Seem to have lost my light in here, but that's all right. We can proceed. So again, let's do just a 10,000-foot overview of this new PTET law. What is this? That's the first question. So this is a voluntary election for a partnership or an S corporation to be subject to Iowa income tax at the entity level, rather than just being a pass-through entity as these entities usually are. When one of these entities elects into this PTET and pays the tax, the owners of that entity receive a percentage of that PTET as a refundable credit that the owners can claim on their Iowa income tax returns. This new Iowa pass-through entity tax, or PTET, applies retroactively to tax years beginning on or after January 1st, 2022. So we'll talk about some of the unique aspects of that retroactivity here in a few minutes. The department has released about a month ago, I believe, some detailed website guidance on this new pass-through entity tax. I encourage everybody to look at that guidance. We did just push out an update this morning that provides some additional information about the calculation of that tax and some of the forms and schedules that will be used in filing those PTET taxes. So why would a pass-through entity make one of these elections and elect to be subject to tax when it otherwise isn't? That is because when a PTET is elected and paid, it may be deductible on the entity's federal income tax return without regard to the $10,000 state and local tax deduction limit that's applicable to individual owners. So when that tax is paid at the state level, it becomes a business deduction at the entity level that reduces the distributive income that flows through to the owners, thereby giving them that federal tax benefit without the limitation of that $10,000 state and local tax deduction. So the department would encourage everybody to consult with their tax professional about the availability and timing of that PTET deduction. But I can give you some information about the corresponding Iowa deduction for these entities. And the treatment of that is going to be different depending on whether you're deducting the tax at the entity level for tax year 2022 or for 2023 or later. If the entity determines that its PTET paid to Iowa is deductible on its 2022 income tax return, please know that under current Iowa law, those state tax payments are not deductible for Iowa tax purposes. So the entity would be required to add back the Iowa tax deducted on the federal return on their state return and report that Iowa adjustment, the add back of the Iowa tax to its owners on Schedules K1. Now, if the entity determines that the tax it pays is deductible on its 2023 return or later, then Iowa, for 2023 or later, Iowa no longer requires pass-through entities or any corporate income tax filer to add back Iowa income tax on the return. In other words, if you deduct the PTET for 2023 or later, then the tax is deductible and the refunds are taxable to the entity in the same manner that they are on the federal return. This is important to keep in mind because this 2022, if you deduct the tax in 2022, this Iowa add back is required even though the corresponding credits that are reported to the owners are subject to reduction. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just want to make everybody aware of this 2022 tax treatment if the entity were to determine that its tax payment was deductible for that 2022 tax year. To make this PTET election, It must be made by an authorized person from the pass-through entity. So this is going to be somebody from the pass-through entity that has the authority to sign the entity's Iowa income tax return and bind the entity and its owners for Iowa income tax purposes. When an entity makes this PTET election for a year, it is irrevocable. However, it only applies to one tax year. So an entity, if it chooses to make an election, for example, in tax year 2022, it is bound by that election and can't revoke it. However, in tax year 2023 or any other future tax year, it can make or not make the election for that tax year, and the prior elections do not carry forward, so to speak. Quickly, how this PTET interacts with the Iowa composite return. As I believe most of you are probably aware, starting in 2022, Iowa enacted a new composite return. This is called the Iowa PTE-C composite return. It is mandatory for any entity that has non-resident members. Under this new PTET law, if an entity elects for a tax year into this PTET tax, it is not required to file an Iowa composite return for that same tax year. So it's an either or. Either you elect into the PTET for the tax year, or you are subject to those composite return filing requirements if you happen to have non-resident members. Now, I know a lot of entities have already filed or are about to file their 2022 income tax returns and may have already filed their composite returns. So please know that if an entity has already filed its 2022 composite return, it will not be prohibited from also making a 2022 PTET election. A little bit of information for pass-through entity owners. Once that PTET is paid by the entity to the state of Iowa, each owner will receive a refundable credit, what we're calling the PTET credit. And that credit will be equal to a percentage of the electing pass-through entity's net PTET liability. This percentage is essentially a reduction of the total credits available using the tax rate in effect for the applicable tax year that the PTET is calculated on. So for example, if an entity makes a PTET election for tax year 2022, and pays a certain amount of PTET to the state of Iowa, the amount of PTET credits that the entity can then report to its owners is equal to 91.47% of the PTET it's paid to the state of Iowa. In other words, it must reduce the PTET credits before they are reported to the owners by 8.53%. Similarly, the same rules will apply for 2023 or later, using the rate, the PTET rate, tax rate in effect for that tax year. These PTET credits are required to be allocated to each owner in the same manner that the entity's taxable income was allocated to the owner. Once these credits are reported to the owners, they can be claimed by those owners on Iowa tax returns for the same tax year that the owner is reporting its related K-1 income from the entity. Now, there are two exceptions I want to make you aware of here. There are two types of owners who are not eligible under Iowa law to claim PTET credits, and that would be an insurance company or a credit union. If an insurance company or a credit union happens to be an owner of a pass-through entity that makes one of these elections and it receives a PTET credit from that entity, it is ineligible to claim their PTET credit under Iowa law. And that is because insurance companies are exempt from the Iowa corporate income tax and instead pay the Iowa insurance premiums tax. Similarly, credit unions are also exempt from the Iowa corporate income tax and instead pay the monies and credits tax applicable to credit unions. A quick note about tiered pass-through entities. So if you have an owner of a pass-through entity that is itself a pass-through entity and receives a PTET credit from another entity, these credits are claimed at the entity level by the pass-through entity. So for example, if a partnership receives a PTET credit from another partnership for the tax year, that receiving partnership can claim its PTET credit either against the PTET that it would owe on its tax return if it makes an election, or it can claim it against its composite tax that it would owe if it doesn't make the PTET election. And it can use that composite return, at least for tax year 2022, use that composite return to request a refund even if it doesn't owe composite tax. So it's important to remember that these PTET credits, when they are allocated to another pass-through entity, are claimed at the entity level. The entity itself may receive a refund if the tax it owes is less than the credit it received, and then the entity will receive that refund directly. Those credits are not further allocated to the owners of that tiered pass-through entity. This operates similar to how composite credits are currently claimed by entities to the state of Iowa. All of these pass-through entity owners, when they receive their PTET or PTET credits, are still required under Iowa law to file Iowa income tax returns and report their distributive income from the electing pass-through entity. So they still report the full amount of income and tax items on their return, but they are eligible for that credit they received to offset the double taxation. There is one exception to this now: non-resident individual owners. If a non-resident individual owner, if their only Iowa source income from the year is one or more of these electing pass-through entities, and their PTET credits equal or exceed their individual Iowa individual tax liability, that non-resident is relieved of their requirement to file an income tax return with the state of Iowa. However, they are still allowed to file that return if they are due a refund and wanted to make sure that they claim their refund. They're just not required to file that return. So that's, again, just a very quick 10,000 foot view description of this new pass-through entity tax. I'd like to roll right into the retroactive piece for tax year 2022 and talk about how that's going to work and how this new GovConnect Iowa form will work. So, as you know, this law was retroactive to tax year 2022. The department has determined to not modify any of its 2022 tax forms in order to implement this retroactive tax. Instead, the department is currently developing a 2022 PTET form that will be filed on GovConnect Iowa. That form is expected to be available by October 1st, so about a week and a half for these entities to start utilizing that form. This GovConnect Iowa form will be a supplement to the 1065 or 1120S that the entity already filed with the state of Iowa. So the entity is required to file its Iowa income tax return on or before the day that it files its PTET form on GovConnect Iowa. This GovConnect Iowa form will also compute each owner's credit and will facilitate the reporting of those credits to the owners. The credits will be reported on a separate schedule, so there will be no amended K-1s necessary. And then again, those owners will claim those PTET credits similar to how they claim or could claim composite credits on their Iowa income tax returns. So who can actually file this 2022 PTET form on GovConnect Iowa once it becomes available? As I mentioned earlier, the election must be made by an authorized person. So that is the individual who has the authority to file the PTET form on GovConnect Iowa on behalf of the pass-through entity. Again, that is an individual from the entity with the authority to sign the entity's return and bind the entity and its owners for Iowa income tax purposes. However, if the entity desires to have a third-party individual, a tax return preparer or other employee file this return on the entity's behalf, that may be accomplished and allowed if the third-party individual, which we'll call the return preparer, gets pass-through entity electronic filing authorization form from the pass-through entity. This form is available on our website. There's a link provided on the guidance that we just updated this morning. This form is required to be filled out prior to submitting the third-party preparer submitting the PTET on GovConnect Iowa. This form only provides authorization for the pass-through entity or for the return preparer to complete and submit this PTET form on GovConnect Iowa. It does not provide authorization for this third-party person to discuss the return after it has been filed, or take any other action on that return. If you need the authority to do that on behalf of the pass-through entity, you need to use our normal power of attorney 2848 forms. So again, this authorization is only to provide authority to actually prepare and file this form on GovConnect Iowa. This form is not required to be filed with the Department of Revenue, so it should just be kept with the preparers and the entity's records in case we ask for it at a later date. So again, no filing requirement with the state of Iowa. So let's move right into a discussion of how and tutorial of how this form will look on GovConnect Iowa. I'm going to go through a tutorial of how you would complete this form through a non-logged in, what we call quick file feature. So there'll be two options for filing this 2022 PTET form. An entity can log into its account on GovConnect Iowa and then submit the return through its logged in account. That is certainly the preferred method for the department's perspective, for anybody that has access to that account, because it reduces the likelihood of processing errors if you're logged into your account. So we encourage everybody that has an account to file this return, this form, through their GovConnect Iowa login. Even if you don't have a login, though, there is going to be this quick file feature for anybody to file the form outside of a login. And that's what I'm going to walk through today. The only real difference between the two is people who log into their GovConnect Iowa account will have to complete fewer steps in order to submit the return. So what we're looking at here is the landing page for GovConnect Iowa. You'll see the existing file a return feature on GovConnect Iowa, designated by that red arrow. That is where we're going to start with this return once it becomes available. So once you click on file a return, you're going to be taken to the next page, and you will see a link to file a 2022 PTET form. So once you click on that, you move right into the return. I've got screenshots to walk us through each step of the return so you can see how it functions. What you're going to see is a number of interview questions that ask certain questions of the entity to ensure that it is in the right spot and eligible to file this return. Then it's going to collect certain demographic information, tax year information, address, FEIN, from the entity, and then we move right into the return calculation items. So as you can see, the first interview slide provides some general information about this PTET form and who is eligible to file the form. Once you click through that, you move on to the next interview question or interview slide, which provides essentially some additional information. As we mentioned earlier, it tells the taxpayer that it must file its 2022 partnership or S corporation income return prior to filing this 2022 PTET form. And it also provides some information about who is authorized to complete the form on behalf of the pass-through entity. So once the filer has read this and does wish to proceed, they will click through to the next slide of the return. Here we start collecting some information about the pass-through entity. So it's going to ask you to designate whether you're filing as a partnership or an S corporation or neither. Obviously, if you click neither option, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if you click the third button, the return is going to tell you that you're not eligible to file this PTET form. And of course, as we know now, that is because only partnerships and S corporations can make this PTET election. It's going to also ask you to confirm that you filed your 2022 return already, so you're eligible to file this PTET form. If you meet both of those requirements, you will move on to the next screen where the return will collect tax year information from you. You'll see that some of this demographic information about the entity is going to be collected twice. We're going to ask you to input it more than once. And that's essentially for quality control, because the information you enter on this PTET form will be used to match it in our system to the return you already filed, to ensure that those are essentially filed properly in our system. As we know now, this 2022 PTET form is available for tax year 2022. It is also going to be available for any short year filers who need to file a short year 2023 return. The short year meaning less than 12 months. And they want to make this election prior to the time that 2023 forms are available. Once those 2023 forms become available on our website and we accept those return, the filing gate opens, so to speak, we will remove this 2023 feature, and this will only be used for 2022 returns. But you'll see here that the return asks you to enter your beginning and ending dates of your tax year. It will ask you to submit those or enter those twice for quality control. Once you do that, we will move on to legal name, FEIN, and address. Now, keep in mind that the information on this 2022 form should be entered exactly as the information appeared on the return you already filed, the income tax return you already filed with the state of Iowa. You'll see that it's going to ask for your legal name and FEIN twice for quality control. It's also going to verify your address. So once you enter your address here, you're going to click the verify address button. And if it needs to modify your address slightly to fit the official USPS version of your address, it will do that. You'll be given an option to verify your address. Once you see that it's been verified, you'll see that little green check down here that says address has been verified, and you'll be eligible to move on to the next part of the return. Whoa. Oh, jumped ahead. There we go. Okay. So next, return type. For everybody who's filing this the first time, obviously you're going to check original return. If you file this 2022 PTET form and you determine later that you need to amend your income tax return because the entity's income has changed, you would also be required to file an amended 2022 PTET form to update that the return information provided on the PTET form. If you were doing that at a later date, you'd check amended here, and you'd see another box to explain the reason for your amendment. But I suspect everybody early on here is going to be filing an original return, so you'll designate original there. And then we move right into the return calculation. You'll notice as we go through this that a lot of these line items will be pre-populated or calculated for you. So this form is going to ask for you to input certain information from your return, and for the most part, it will do the return calculations for you. So the very start of this return is your Iowa source distributive items. The starting point for this PTET is going to be those Iowa source income and deductions that are reported on your return. If it's the 1065, you'll see this on part 4, line 28. If it's the 1120S, you'll see this on part 4, line 27. So once you enter that Iowa source distributive items on the return, this GovConnect Iowa return will calculate your gross PTET. So that is going to be the calculation uses the top individual rate for the tax year, which for 2022 was 8.53%. So you'll see the return will auto-calculate your gross PTET due. From there, if you are a pass-through entity that is also a financial institution that pays Iowa franchise tax credit, Iowa law allows you a franchise tax credit against your Iowa PTET. The return line here tells you where to determine what that Iowa franchise tax is that the entity paid for tax year 2022. You would enter that on this line. The return will calculate your net Iowa PTET due to the state of Iowa. So it's as simple as that. It's a few pieces of information from your income tax return, and you'll be able to calculate this PTET. Keep in mind this net Iowa PTET because this will be used later to calculate your owner's refundable credits. So once you've started this main return and input that information, you'll move on to stage 2 of the financial part of the return, and that is payments and refundable credits. If the entity has made a voucher payment to the state of Iowa on their partnership or S corporation account since the entity filed that was not reported on the entity's income tax return that it already filed, the entity would be eligible to claim that voucher payment against this PTET, and line 5A is where you'd report those voucher payments to the state of Iowa. From there, the entity can claim refundable PTET credits or composite credits. That's going to be line 5B or 5C that it has received from another entity for tax year 2022, provided that those PTET credits or composite credits were not already claimed on another return. So if you are a partnership or an S corporation and you received one of these credits, again, like I mentioned earlier, you would be eligible to claim those against your composite tax on a composite return. Or if you were a financial institution, you may have also claimed those credits on your 1120F. So as long as those PTET credits or composite credits have not already been claimed on one of those other qualifying returns, you can claim them against your PTET on this return. From there, line 5D will calculate your total payments and refundable credits available against your net PTET. The next page, the next slide on this return is essentially the calculating your tax due or refund. So if your total credits and payments exceed your net PTET, you are due a refund. If it's the other way around and the credits do not exceed the net PTET for the year, you're going to owe tax to the state of Iowa pursuant to that election, and that's where those refunds or credits are calculated on this total amount interview screen. Again, all of these amounts, to the extent they are calculated, will be calculated automatically on this return. The only thing you'd be required to do on this interview or this stage of the return is to determine if you have a refund due, how much of it you want applied as a credit carry forward to your next year's return, and how much of it you are requesting as a refund. So now we have completed the return, and now it's time to calculate your owner's refundable credits. And the PTET form on GovConnect Iowa will also do that for you. So as we talked about earlier, those credits are subject to reduction before they are reported to your owners. And the return is going to do that for you. So it's going to pull your net Iowa PTET from line 4, reduce it by that 8.53%, which is essentially the same as multiplying it by 91.47%. And the return will tell you how much in available PTET credits you have to report to your owners. And then the return is going to ask you to enter your information about each of your owner's credits. So we're going to need the name, ID type, ID, and amount of owner credit that you're allocating for each owner of the pass-through entity. There are two options for completing this phase of the return. You can do this, you can enter this information directly into GovConnect Iowa as you're completing the return. Or if you desire to complete some of this information prior to starting the return submission process, the department has created a template. It's an Excel spreadsheet template that you can access on our pass-through entity tax guidance page that was updated this morning. You can use this spreadsheet to input information about all the available information about your owners and the credits they will receive. And then when you get to this interview stage on the return, you will be able to upload using this hyperlink here, upload that Excel spreadsheet onto the return and pre-populate that information onto the return, thereby saving you the requirement to enter it manually while you're doing the return. After you've completed your owner's credit information, you are essentially done completing the return. You're going to be given a review stage to review everything on your return to ensure that it is complete and correct before you submit it. There is an option at each stage of this GovConnect Iowa return to save a draft if you need to complete the return at a later date. So if you click Save Draft at any moment, you'll be asked for email information, and once you submit that save draft, or you save the draft, I should say, you will get an email confirmation with a confirmation code that you can use to get back onto GovConnect Iowa and go to, I believe it's called Access Saved or Filed Returns. Enter your confirmation code and it will take you right back to where your return was, to the point you had saved it, and you can complete that return at a later date. I believe saved drafts are usually kept for about 30 days before they are cleared from our system. So there is a time limit on how long you can save a draft, but I just want to point out it will be possible to save a draft on GovConnect Iowa and complete that return at a later date. This will be available for people who are logged into the GovConnect Iowa account or who are filing this outside of a login. But assuming you have not saved a draft and we want to go ahead and complete this or submit this return now, you would click the submit button. And then to sign this return, the signature of this return is your email address. You will be asked for your email address. You'll be asked to confirm that email address. And then by clicking OK, you are confirming that you have the authority to submit this return on behalf of the pass-through entity. And to the best of your knowledge and belief, the information is true, correct, and complete. So when you hit that OK button, that submits the draft to the state of Iowa. You will be given a confirmation screen with a confirmation code and information about what is next. This confirmation code will also be sent to you in an email. So you'll have an email confirmation as well. As you can see here, the what's next will tell you that the department will contact you if additional information is needed. It is a reminder that if the PTET form shows a balance due, you're not quite done yet. You need to then go to the GovConnect Iowa again and submit payment to that partnership or S corporation account to ensure that the tax is paid timely with your filed return. And of course, it also gives you information or a reminder that if you discover errors or omissions later, you do have an obligation to file an amended PTET form on GovConnect Iowa. Once that form is submitted and the tax has been paid, then the credits will be reported. The credits that you reported on that GovConnect Iowa return are then reported to your owners to enable them to claim those on their returns. These credits will be reported to each owner using the 2022 Iowa PTET credit schedule. You can see I've got an image of that schedule on the screen here. This schedule is available on our website. There is a link to it on our updated website guidance. It in a way operates as in the same way that a K-1 would for the owners. So the entity will fill out this schedule for each owner, provide the credit amount eligible to that owner, and send that PTET credit schedule to all owners. And then the owners will claim these PTET credits on their Iowa tax returns in the same manner that they did or would have claimed a composite credit. Both our website guidance and the PTET credit schedule that you see on the screen have information or instructions for each type of owner for how to claim these PTET credits for tax year 2022. Owners will claim these credits, these 2022 PTET credits, for the same tax year that they are reporting their related K-1 income from the entity. I think I mentioned that earlier. These credits can be claimed on an original Iowa return or an amended Iowa tax return. And the credit must be claimed within the owner's statute of limitations for requesting a refund. So that's generally 3 years from the return due date. So I just want to make clear, because we have received some questions about the timing of claiming these credits. There is a deadline for claiming or for filing the PTET form by the entity, but the deadline for claiming these credits is the normal refund period applicable to the owners. So generally, they will not be required to claim these credits by that January or the end of the year. They can claim them within their normal statute of limitations. So I just mentioned the deadline for claiming these PTET credits. Let's talk briefly about the deadline for filing this form on GovConnect Iowa. For tax year 22, the 2022 PTET form is going to be due by the later, this is important, the later of January 2nd, 2024, or the due date for filing the entity's income tax return, including extensions. If any of you have read our website guidance before today, you probably noticed that the original due date established by the department was December 31st, 2023. But it just so happens after we set that due date, that falls on a Sunday, and the next day is a state holiday. So under Iowa law, these returns are due the next business day, which will be January 2nd, 2024. Please know that these late PTET elections, if they are made, are subject to rejection by the department. But again, I just want to make sure everybody's clear that the deadline for filing this form for 2022 is the later of both of those dates. So no matter when your tax year ended for 2022 and when your tax return was due, everybody will have until at least January 2nd, 2024 to file this 2022 PTET form on GovConnect Iowa. Is an electing pass-through entity required to make estimated PTET payments for tax year 2022? The answer is no. No tax filer will be required to make estimated PTET payments for tax year 2022. So that is welcome news for all filers who especially have already filed their return and wouldn't even have an opportunity to make estimated payments. Similarly, of course, I think it stands to reason that no one will be assessed underpayment penalties related to those estimated payments because no one's required to make them for 2022. Let's talk about other penalties and interest briefly though. For tax year 2022, this will depend on the pass-through entity's tax year end. So if the entity's 2022 tax year ended prior to May 11th, 2023, the entity will not incur penalty or interest if it files its 2022 PTET form by the later of that January 2nd, 2024 date, or the due date for its income tax return, including extensions. If the entity's tax year ended on or after May 11th, 2023, so this would only include certain fiscal year filers, these entities will not incur penalty and interest if, as provided, their 2022 PTET form is filed and paid by the due date of their income tax return, including extensions. I mentioned extensions here twice. I just want to point out under Iowa law, extensions, 6-month extensions are automatic as long as the pass-through entity pays 90% of its tax due, which would include the PTET tax due by the original due date of the income tax return. I'm actually going to skip these slides because they are already mentioned on our website. So we only have about 15 minutes left, and it took us that long to get through tax year 2022. I know everybody is also interested in how this will work for 2023, but I do think it might be a good idea to stop here and answer some of these questions live because there are quite a few questions We only have 15 minutes left. So I'm just gonna run right through all of these questions in the order that I see them. If, first question, if federal government makes changes to the SALT cap prior to 2026, for example, raising the cap to 50,000, would this have any impact on the Iowa PTET? Yes and no. If Congress makes changes to the SALT cap, like the amount, that would not affect the PTET. Entities would still be eligible to claim this PTET in Iowa if they choose to. One way that the Iowa PTET is tied to the federal SALT cap deduction limitation is in that if Congress extends the SALT cap deduction limitation beyond 2025, then under Iowa law, this Iowa PTET election would also be extended for the same period of time automatically. That would not require another act of the legislature. So any year that there is a SALT cap limitation at the federal level, this Iowa PTET will be available to Iowa taxpayers. Next question, Iowa source distributive items 1065 line 28 includes guaranteed payments. If a partnership has two members, I'm reading this to myself before I try to answer it. So this is providing an example of income allocations, and it's asking whether the PTET credit would be allocated 50% each or 45 and 55%. I think this may be too specific of an example to answer here, but I guess I will say, under Iowa law, as I mentioned earlier, these PTET credits are required to be allocated to members in the same manner that they allocated taxable income. So even if one member perhaps owns greater than 50, if they receive a greater percentage of the income than their equity ownership percentage reflects, perhaps because of special allocations, those can be taken into account when determining the amount of PTET credits to allocate to that owner. So it really should follow the same proportion of the total income allocated to that member, that the member should receive that same proportion of the total available PTET credits. I hope that answers your question. Does the PTET affect the individual S corporation apportionment credit in any way? The answer to that is no. When an entity makes this PTET election, all of the individual owners of that S corporation, resident owners of that S corporation, are still eligible to claim the S corp apportionment credit on that form Iowa 134 in the same manner that they would have regardless of whether the entity made this PTET election. So short answer, no. The S corporation apportionment credit is not going to be affected by this PTET election. Can you comment about whether trusts will be able to utilize the PTET credit or pass it through to its beneficiaries? Trusts will utilize the PTET credit at the entity level. So if a trust receives a PTET credit from a partnership or S corporation, it will be eligible to claim that credit directly on its Iowa 1041 and receive a refund for the excess if it's due a refund. It can also choose to claim the PTET credit against its composite tax it might owe on the composite return, the PTE-C, and also receive a refund if the credit is in excess of the tax. So the PTET credits will be claimed at the entity level by the trust. It will not be allocated or passed through to the beneficiaries in the same manner that other Iowa tax credits are. Let's see here. I've got a question here. Are these pass-through entity taxes paid to other states and deducted on the federal return able to be deducted for Iowa in 2023? I believe, I think the answer, or the question may be referring to whether the entity itself can deduct these taxes. On the entity's return, the answer is yes, with the exception that if the entity determines, excuse me, if the entity determines that it's able to deduct their PTET on a 2022 return, that Iowa PTET must be added back on the 2022 return. But this question is asking about 2023, so the answer is yes. Those PTET payments are an eligible deduction for Iowa tax purposes on the Iowa return. So for cash basis taxpayers, if the 2022 PTET is paid in 2023, is that a 2023 reduction? The answer is most likely yes. Generally speaking, both cash basis and accrual basis taxpayers deduct state tax payments in the year that they are made. But again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the department does not generally provide that level of analysis on federal law. So we are encouraging all taxpayers to consult with their tax professional about the appropriate year to deduct their PTET payment on their federal return. Will the individual income tax filers be required to attach the letters generated by I Department of Revenue on their personal income tax returns? That's a great question. I should have mentioned that earlier. Those 2022 credit schedules that the owners receive from the entity, those are not required to be attached to the owner's return when they claim those credits. The owners are required to keep those schedules in their records in the event that the department may ask for them later, but they do not need to be transmitted with the return in order to claim those tax credits. And the credit schedule, if you read the instructions, it will describe that in greater detail. And as I mentioned earlier, also describe how each owner can claim those credits. Question here about, are you considering allowing fiduciary returns to elect into the PTET? We are not considering it. That would require a law change. So the department would not have the authority to allow this allow a fiduciary to make a PTET election without a law change by the Iowa legislature. Got a question here about last week's webcast mentioned e-file and pay shutdown for GovConnect Iowa. It looks like it's asking about how this will impact the ability to file PTET elections. I believe last week's webinar was probably referencing some of the discontinuation of these e-file and pay features on the department's main website, which is tax.iowa.gov. And that those things are being discontinued because they are moving to GovConnect Iowa for individuals. So the discontinuation of those e-file and pays should not affect any entity's ability to file this PTET or make a PTET payment, because both of those things will be required to be done on GovConnect Iowa. If PTET payments are subject to underpayment penalties for quarterly estimates, how are they calculated? We haven't talked about 2023 yet, because I want to get through some of these questions. As I mentioned, nobody has an estimated payment requirement for 2022 for the PTET. But in the future, if you're subject to these estimated payment requirements, underpayment penalties will be computed in the same manner that corporations compute them. These entities will use, if you're familiar with corporate income tax returns in Iowa, we have the Iowa 2220 that is used to calculate underpayment penalties. Partnerships and S corporations will also use that form to calculate underpayment penalties in the future. So again, they'll be computed essentially in the same manner that corporations do. Any differences will be explained on that 2220 form. Is there any legislation expected to correct the double reduction of the Iowa PTET and the add back for the available credit? Not that I'm aware of, but we still have several months to go till session starts, so I can't speak to what may or may not come up during the Iowa legislative session, I think that question would be better directed to members of the legislature. All right. Question here, which is a variation of the trust question asked earlier. Essentially, you know, if a PTET credit is allocated to a trust, those credits are claimed at the entity level. But this person here is asking about how these credit claims will work in this case of a grantor trust, issuing a grantor letter. In those cases, those entities are disregarded entities for federal and Iowa income tax purposes. So the individual owners of that grantor trust will be eligible to claim those PTET credits on their Iowa 1040. So that is one example where, in essence, these PTET credits will flow through to the ultimate owner, who in this case is an individual owning a disregarded entity grantor trust. So we have 4 minutes left, a lot of questions. I might just switch back and just give everybody a very quick tutorial of 2023 and later, just to make sure we tie up all the loose ends. So how is this selection going to be made going forward for tax year 2023? There's going to be 2 methods to make this election starting in 2023. First, the entity will be able to log into its GovConnect Iowa account and log an election for 2023 or later. In order to do this, the entity must be logged into its GovConnect Iowa account. This election method is still under development, so we will provide more information in the future when it is available. But it's important to know that this is only going to record the election itself if the entity chooses to make the election through this method. The PTET calculation will still be made on the income tax return that's filed later. And that flows nicely into the second method for making the PTET election for 2023 or later, and that is directly on the Iowa income tax return. I've got a draft of our partnership return here that shows the new features added for entities to make that election and calculate the net PTET due on the income tax return. This will look similar on the 1120S return. So this will be the main method, I think, that most entities use to make this election. I also want to point out very quickly, last year, composite credits were only eligible to be claimed by pass-through entities on the composite return. Starting in 2023, both composite credits and PTET credits can be claimed by the pass-through entity on the 1065 or 2023. So that is going to be a big change for claiming these credits, and it offers some more flexibility for these entities to claim these credits even if they don't have a composite return filing requirement. Election must be made by the due date of the entity's return, including extensions. We talked earlier about how extensions work in Iowa. They're automatic if you pay 90% of your tax due by the original due date. So this brings up a very important note I want to make everybody aware of. If a pass-through entity fails to make a pass-through election on GovConnect Iowa by the original due date, or it fails to pay 90% of its tax due, including PTET, by the original due date, thereby making it eligible for that automatic extension, it will lose the ability to make a PTET election on an extended Iowa return. So it's very important starting in 2023 that these entities, your entities, take some sort of action before the original due date if they intend to ultimately make this PTET election on an extended Iowa return to preserve their right to make that election at a later date. Penalties and interest will work similar to how you are accustomed to penalties and interest working on other pay returns. The entity will incur late file and late pay penalties if at least 90% of the Iowa tax due, including the PTET, is not paid by the original due date. Interest on the PTET will be computed from the original due date of the return. Quarterly estimated payments we talked about earlier. For all calendar year filers, you won't be required to make quarterly estimates in 2023 either. That is because quarterly estimates will only be required in 2023 if the tax year of the pass-through entity starts after May 10th, 2023. I mentioned earlier that the underpayment penalties will also be reported on the 2020 Iowa 2220, excuse me, in the same manner that corporations do. PTET credits will be reported on the K1s. There are new features being added to the K1s to report those credits to the owners. And that ends our presentation. I know we ran out of time for additional questions, but like Kyle mentioned, all of those questions will be recorded. And to the extent we didn't get to them here, I will follow up with everybody to get you an answer.
Perfect. So I'm gonna go through my little wrap-up spiel, just kind of re-emphasize what you just said and some other things as well. Sophie is sending stuff out in the chat, so make sure you keep reading through that and everything. Mike, if you could do me a favor and go back through the questions that you answered live. I think you have to click like an extra button to be like answered or something like that, and then you close it. Right now they're just kind of sitting open, so then those will all be good to go. But if you cannot, that's okay too. So I'll just finish up by saying thanks again to Mike for sharing information, all this information regarding Iowa's pass-through entity tax, PTET information. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available to watch on our website or by searching for Iowa's source link on YouTube. This is going to be within a few days, so just be on the lookout for that. If your questions were not answered today, make sure you download the PDF version of the slides that's been in the chat. Sophie sent it out a couple of times now. You can also find it on our website as well. You can download it from there. As your answers to your questions may be within the slide deck itself, you can also rewatch the webinar for clarification on certain points. Anything that wasn't answered today is going to be sent to Mike alongside your contact information, so don't worry about that. As a reminder, Iowa SourceLink does not provide continuing education credits or certificates for your attendance here today. You will receive an email that basically you can use as proof of attendance for here today, but it's not an official certificate. So sorry about that. The next Department of Revenue webinar will be held on October 11th from noon to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. The webinar will provide an overview for Iowa taxpayers of the Department of Revenue's processes regarding third-party access to tax accounts. So if either you or someone you know would be interested in attending something like that, make sure you visit iowasourcelink.com and navigate to our tax webinars page to sign up. So until next time, take care, everyone. And thanks again, Mike, for sharing some awesome information today.
Thank you.
Bye.